I'm the recovery Ronin, and we're gonna go over. I'm gonna talk about my personal journey and kind of what I discovered is the true enemy at its core, like what it was like for me when my transition actually really happened. So, a quick backdrop, if you haven't heard, I've relapsed over 200 times. I'm an IV heroin drug user. I was homeless over 10 years, and it took me many years. It was only the last couple of years I started realizing how backwards all the understanding of the way I treated my addiction and what the world thought about it, that we saw the hundreds of detoxes and relapses as evidence that I didn't want it, that I didn't suffer enough, that I really wasn't ready to stop using, which was crazy because the truth was I didn't choose the relapse, but did choose to cold turkey detox myself and fight for my recovery with everything I had. The problem was that my willingness wasn't met with true guidance or wisdom. It wasn't out of lack of trying. I asked a lot. And to explore this deeper as a clinician, I started realizing many years ago that nobody can define a cliche anymore. And here's a quick test that I do. Like, I ask my groups, I ask my colleagues, my friends, my peers all the time, what does keep it simple mean? Right? And they'll give me another cliche. Well, don't overcomplicate it. Right. Well, how do you do it? Like, what's it like? Well, just one day at a time. And it's like nobody can do it. So I started literally running groups of this. And I would put a bunch of cliches on a board and break them up into groups. And one time I was at one of the most prominent treatment centers here in South Florida called Recovery Unplugged. It's all around the country, right? They use music as a major apparatus. And I was running a group with like 42 people. And I put 15 cliches on a board. And the question is, why is this cliche important to recovery? How does it actually work? What does it mean in your life? There's only one rule. You cannot use a cliche to define a cliche. I even grouped 5 clients together specifically because they had 12-step experience, more than 40 years of recovery experience in this group of patients. They chose the cliche, keep it simple, stupid. To define it, they used 7 cliches. Right after I gave them 15 minutes to discuss it and explain to the group why it's important for the recovery, what it could look like, what skills. Again, there's the questions. And the only rule is you can't use a cliche to define a cliche. No group has ever done it till this day. Each of the 12 steps is anchored by a core spiritual principle: honesty, hope, surrender, faith, courage, willingness, humility, love, integrity, self-discipline, and service. These principles are supposed to be the living heartbeat of a 12-step program. And they are beautiful, they are profound. But in the modern world, drowned in distraction, overstimulated by dopamine, and cut off from culture, stillness, and deep reflection, these principles have become little more than performances. Words we say, badges we wear, ideals we gesture at without ever truly integrating them. This is what I started realizing in the last couple of years. It goes deeper than just cliches. It's that nobody can define a principle for themselves anymore because we've lost that gift of deep self-reflection, that deep intrinsic work. And again, it's not our fault, right? Where I started in my recovery journey, I think was light years behind an average person in the 1930s and 40s because I grew up with a television at my house. In the last 20 years, I've had a smartphone in my pocket. I had constant distraction, such a overstimulated and dopamine-rich environment that sitting with myself was something I had to learn, and it was very hard. It's hard for all of us to sit still. Even the University of Virginia did research with this back in, 2014. Put people, and these were normies, they put them in a room for 9 to 15 minutes. They could just sit there in silence, or they could push the big red button and shock the crap out of themselves. Many of the men, a little less of the women, but many of them chose to shock themselves rather than just sit in the silence of their own minds and body. When I watched a movie and I see a character sacrifice themselves to overcome fear, I can feel their courage. I grew up admiring Walter Payton for his courage and his grit, but none of that taught me how to see myself through these principles. None of it taught me how to apply courage or humility or integrity to my own wounds, my own patterns, my own life. Understanding the definition of a principle is easy. Living it in a way that challenges your limiting beliefs, your false narratives, your flesh-driven impulses, that's the part we struggle to learn. And from everything I've witnessed, from decades of obsession with understanding these struggles, the truth is simple. Not easy to accept, but most people just don't have a skill for challenge, only a skill for projected arrogance, a skill for projecting insecurity, not examining it, a skill for repeating slogans, not embodying truth. We've lost the art of introspection, the muscle of self-reflection, the spiritual grit required to internalize anything deeply. Challenging our language, learning the lingo, and fitting in can give us an appearance of recovery, but it's not the same as shifting perspective, identity, or purpose. It creates a version of success measured by belonging, not transformation. And this is where we miss the mark. Introspection gets replaced by performance, connection gets replaced by conformity, and principles get replaced by personality. Take the phrase principles over personalities, right? Fundamental core identity for a functioning 12 culture. It was never meant to mean don't rock the boat, ignore the flaws, or accept everyone's behavior. It was pointing to something much deeper. That trust must rise above ego, that values must outweigh image, that spiritual practice must matter more than personal preference. Its original meaning was sharp and courageous. Your identity, pride, and reputation do not matter more than the principle you are trying to embody. Honesty over popularity, courage over comfort, integrity over approval, humility over performance. It was meant to dissolve the ego, not protect it. But somewhere along the way, that phrase got flipped and became a shield used to avoid accountability, excuse dysfunction, and silence real growth. I've had it said to me many times. Similar to progress, not perfection, right? To justify any behavior we want. Well, it's progress, not perfection. Sure, but where's the progress? Right? If you're just using this phrase, this cliche platitude, like it's a bumper sticker to stay exactly who you are, we are completely missing the point. And everybody knows I'm telling the truth. They just don't want to look in the fucking mirror. When we lose introspection, we lose the principle. And the true message calls us back to a higher path, to grow beyond personality, altogether to live by spiritual laws rather than social approval, and let those principles shape the person we become. I do not want to simply point out the flaws in how we live. This is the beginning of my journey. You know what? Let me stop sharing this. I might make a long form video, but for the short ones, this is going to be where I get into where I started discovering myself. I'm not here just to point out the flaws in how we live or the ways our personalities learn to survive. I want to point out the message inside of the one that leads towards real freedom, peace, happiness, and confidence. By the time you finish this, my hope is that you not just that you see the ego more clearly, but you begin to see your enemy for what it is, the lies you are attached to, the limiting beliefs buried in the subconscious, the false narratives of the mind, and the impulsive cravings of our bodies. We do not know what we do not know, and it is hard to understand a cage you have lived in your whole life. People would rather be right and suffer forever than question the story that has become their identity. I know because I lived there. Over the years, I studied behavioral science, mystic teachings, recovery models, philosophy, and every framework I can get my hands on. What I found was not contradiction, but convergence. DBT, CBT, REBT, ACT, smart recovery, they all point towards something real. So does Stoicism, Zen, the middle path, Wu Wei, ancient traditions of awakening. Even modern research on mindset and neuroplasticity echo the same truth. The problem is not that the wisdom is missing. The problem is that it has been scattered, diluted, overcomplicated, and too rarely practiced. I have known countless people who say they believe in behavioral tools, spiritual principles, or growth, yet have never truly lived them. Or they tried, felt the fire of discomfort, and backed out. Because that is the hardest part of putting your ego on the fire, especially in a world so distracted, this overstimulated, this overwhelmed, this overfed. My suffering did not give me a choice. It forced me to learn. Again, there was no house of stability for me. I either moved from the house to chaos and continued growth into the house of creation, or I'm always going back to the house of chaos. I was just too damaged. What began in desperation slowly became confrontation. I started challenging my true master, Not heroin, not attention from women, not Xanax, not even trauma. The ego, the part of me attached to every narrative, every excuse, every belief, every desire. I was not just using substances. I was enslaved by my own mind, body, and conditioning. I remember realizing this while waiting for a bed at the Salvation Army. I was desperate to change, and for some reason I started thinking about rules. Stupid little rules, sitting there taking 6 weeks to get a bed in the Salvation Army, detoxing every day, showing up at 6 a.m., waiting to get a bed. My whole life I realized whether you were a boss, teacher, coach, or parent, I followed the rules that made sense to me. The stupid ones were for other people. And if you challenged me on one of them, I would think you're an idiot. What is funny is that impulse is still in me. It still lives in my ego. It's not as attached to it by now. So once I realized this, right, that my arrogance about rules, that stupid rules are for other people, I don't do that. I made myself a promise. While I was going to stay at the Salvation Army, I would follow every rule, every goal, every direction. Of course, I didn't do it perfectly, but I put effort in every day. I learned to control what I could. Then one moment changed everything. There was this big metal double door meant only for deliveries. We're not supposed to use the door. The proper entrance was the front door, 3 hallways around behind the behavioral tech office. But that metal door was right by the smoking tent. It was convenient, tempting, easy. Everybody used it, right? My first morning, I come downstairs, I grab my coffee, and I just stood there staring at this door, right? I didn't tell anybody else about my goal, but I was going to follow the rules, so I wasn't going to use this door. And for whatever reason, like the practices of mindfulness and meditation, something in me finally lit up. I saw it clear as day. I'll never forget this moment. I realized the truth. I was never a slave to heroin or any other drug. I was a slave to my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own behaviors, my own impulsiveness, a slave to my nervous system, my personality, my personal reality, my freaking ego, and my nervous system. I could say I wanted anything. I could mean it with all of my heart. I could swear I was ready. But if my thoughts kept producing excuses and my feelings kept backing those excuses with urgency, resentment, or fear, then my values would always fall behind my bullshit. That was the war. Not out there. Not my past, not the future, not what other people think. In here, in the split second between intention and action, in the moment my perception twisted something simple into a burden and my attitude turned discomfort into defiance. That was the beginning of my change. I started challenging my perceptions, my attitude, my need to be right, my attachment to the my attachment to the version of me that had always been in charge. Once I saw the enemy clearly, I could finally begin to fight the right war. I would start writing principles of the 12-step program on my left hand, and principles of emotional intelligence on my right hand, and everything became a battlefield to me. That is where the shift began. I had to do it intentionally, intrinsically into myself. And there's a question. Are you willing to do the same? Are you willing to open your mind enough to question being right, to look at the stories you protect, the reactions you defend, the feelings you obey as if they're truth? Because that is where freedom begins, not when life gets easier, but when you stop letting your lies lead. So this is me simplifying all that I learned into like one page. A one-page map of human challenge, describing what I learned and how I teach it, as simple as I can. Human transformation happens when belief, biology, behavior, and values align. Every tradition, every serious science, and every authentic spiritual path points to the same truth. You cannot control life, but you can train yourself. The fourth wall is the illusion that separates knowing from becoming, information from embodiment, intention from action. Breaking it requires 2 pillars: mindset and skill set. Apply it across 4 daily contexts powered by peace: perceptions, effort, attitude, concentration, energy. The 2 pillars: mindset. What we used to know as willingness is the commitment to truth over comfort. It's not willing to admit you have a problem, right? Again, that's preschool understanding of what willingness is. And that's what I thought for many years, why I kept failing. I had no problem admitting I was a fucking addict. I had a problem committing to truth over discomfort. It is choosing responsibility over blame, growth over convenience, and discipline over excuses. It is the willingness to question your own stories, surrender false certainty, and focus first on what you can control. That is willingness, not obedience. Authenticity over bullshit. It's going to be very comfortable for those that are first starting. The skill set is the training of the human system. So the two powers, mindset, how we use willingness, skill set, how we train our physiology. It is learning to regulate attention, emotion, physiology, and behavior through practice. It is turning awareness into habit and habit into identity, removing the attachment to the old self, the ego, the belief, the stories, feelings built through experience, and without our awareness, to align with spiritual ideas, noble truths, higher purpose, self, and power. Without mindset, skill becomes mechanical. Without skill, mindset is fantasy. Together, they create coherence. This is about having new experiences intentionally and aligning them with your values rather than the ego's fears. Right? All change runs through 5 trainable levels. What we can control, peace, perception, how I interpret this moment. Like, why am I seeing it this way? Why am I thinking this? Effort, what I choose to give in the moment. Attitude, how I relate to difficulty, right? Why am I feeling this way? How do I relate to it? Concentration, training your attention. This is where we have to start. And energy, what I conserve, leak. Where my attention goes, energy flows. So learning to train attention, learning to train how we react in energy. Where these align, freedom grows. Okay, the 4 contexts of practice. Micro-discipline, awareness training. Small, quantified daily actions expose the mind. 1 breath, 1 glass of water, 1 act of effort. The goal is not the achievement. It is the observation. Excuse appears, emotion follows, stories to defend comfort. Awareness replaces autopilot. Integrity is built, right? So little goals throughout the day. 2, daily friction. Just things that happen. Regulation training, traffic, delays, conflict, inconvenience, your phone not operating as fast as you want, spilling your coffee, your boss being an asshole, stubbing your toe. These moments reveal who is leading. Awareness or reaction. Breath steadies the body, right? Train your attention. Perception reframes the story. Energy is conserved. Presence replaces impulsivity. Emotional mastery grows. 3, life disruption. Trust training, loss, change, illness, uncertainty, pain is allowed, meaning is chosen. Control shifts inward, attitude strengthens, effort focuses, fear becomes fuel, grit matures into faith, identity deepens. So looking at the biggest things of our lives, trusting enough to change how we perceive it. From everything from letting yourself down recently or letting a loved one down or failing at something, fear of bills that or fears or consequence, all the way back to childhood trauma. Inner training, mastery training. This is the specific practice, stillness, meditation, reflection, metacognitive restructuring. Thoughts are watched, feelings are felt, narratives are questioned, impulses dissolve, awareness rewires belief, regulation stabilizes biology, values shape identity, right? So these are 4 things that we can practice, 4 ways to train ourselves intentionally to have coherent experiences, intentionally align with our values and our goals rather than reacting like slaves to the ego. The development path. Small disciplines create awareness. Awareness creates regulation. Regulation creates trust. Trust creates mastery. Mastery promises freedom. And the crazy thing is, I know this is the way. What I figured out is at the core of everything we have ever learned, ever discovered, ever taught, ever practiced as mystical beings. It's all right there. All the science, all the mystical teachings. And we have the neuroscience now to teach us the gears, the buttons. We can use different contexts to really elevate our practice. But the truth is this: either you have awareness and understanding of what healing is, or you relive the same day over and over. It's getting on the path. My job is to make the path bright, observable, easy to understand, repeatable. Your job is to walk it. I am the Recovery Ronin. Thank you for your time.